Next week, 40 Minutes joins the firemen at Hull Central, one of the busiest fire stations in the country, answering calls as wide-ranging as rescuing a budgie from a chip pan fire, dealing with a blazing lorry in a garage, and helping some women trapped in a lift. Fire, next week at 9:30. Tomorrow, Arena meets Jazz.
Going back home and I'm in love. South of Watford, south of Watford. Turn down the motorway, heading south. Heavy, heavy eyes, dry to mouth. South of Watford, south of Watford. Motorway's coming like a video game at 100 miles an hour. London's calling out my name. Can't you feel the fire? South of Watford, south of Watford.
Britain has more than its fair share of fine and distinctive buildings, the best of which, like these, are listed for posterity. In 1980, a very special one was added. It was never graced with a grand ballroom or landscape gardens or a minstrel gallery. In fact, it's a power station. For nearly half a century, Battersea Power Station has sat majestically on the banks of the Thames, defying people to ignore it.
Looking at this, of course, it's an industrial building that's taken a great deal of punishment. I'm rather amazed at what good condition it's in. A lot of weathering, of course, up here, rain and wind, pollution from the building itself, and yet the brickwork still looks pretty good. And what is rather encouraging is that it may find a new use. I very much hope it does. It is a building which I think London ought to keep.
It had a kind of hope about it. It was the last word in classical architecture made modern, as it were. All the detailing is treated with the same kind of care as you might have got from Christopher Wren building St. Paul's. All the details worked out. Nothing is left to accident. And it was regarded as a kind of great white hope of the future.
It's a strange part of London. I mean, it's ridiculous to compare it to St. Paul's, but it's that sort of thing. It's a dominant building of a very different type in a different place in London. But those sort of things, the Tower, St. Paul's, Westminster Abbey, Battersea Power Station.
But its monumental architecture concealed a very different world, one where hard graft was rather more important than aesthetic appreciations.
Listen, now this is what I'm saying. When I went there, my money was £9.15 a week for shift work. That was night work and day work. When you come into history, how much was it then? If we hadn't worked as hard as we did then, you wouldn't have had a job anyway. But that was a big difference to what I had 2 kids to keep.
You don't regret one moment of being over there.
It, and this is a fact. I'll tell you now that when I was a young man and I come out of service, my children was growing up. I never seen my children for 20 years because every weekday and every Saturday and every Sunday I was on maintenance programme in Battersea. You shift workers that had your time off.
Working dark and
we worked
nights.
7 days a week.
Nights and all.
From 1946 till 1967 on a 7-day programme.
The last workers clocked off when the station closed in 1983. Today, Battersea sits and waits. Any week now, a major leisure company takes possession of the place, and whatever its future, Battersea will cut all links with its original purpose, as a building especially conceived to generate the newfangled electricity.
It was clearly a modern source of power, clearly a modern building. In, I think, 1933, the Listener chose it as an image when they had a great debate between modern architects and traditional architects. Electricity was something which seemed the material, the power of the new age.
This is the inside story of modern man's home.
Like a million others, he's so up to date he has everything laid on, every convenience and comfort on switch. One unlucky morning, modern man comes down for a nice old-fashioned cup of tea, and what does he see? He sees there's no light. He sees there's no tea. He sees there's no breakfast. He sees he's up. He's late for work, loses his job because the clock stopped. And this is why. It's a power cut.
Just a few decades earlier, at the turn of the century, electrical power was still a novelty in London, regarded with awe and amazement. By the time large-scale generation became possible in the 1920s, pioneered by Francis Fladgate and his London Power Company, optimism about this new power source was undermined by objections about what it might mean for the environment. In order to quell the controversy, the authorities knew that they'd have to give the proposed Battersea power station style and grandeur. There was only one man for the job, Sir Giles Gilbert Scott. You may not have heard of him, but you'll certainly know his work. Yes, the familiar red telephone box was one of his ideas, and so was Liverpool Cathedral. But it was at Battersea Power Station that Sir Giles really let it all hang out.
Yes, what Scott took a lot of trouble over was the detail, what John Betjeman called the jazz modern detailing of the fluting that you have around the bases of the columns and on the chimneys, something which he sets against the great bare masses of masonry. And Scott, in all his churches, always liked that contrast of detail against great broad masses. He was an artist who could compose what would otherwise have been a rather formless, ugly industrial lump. Yes, it's extraordinary, really, columns of no particular... I said they're Doric, really. Doric columns pumping out smoke and sulphur and ash, but why not? Yes, Scott was very anxious not to have simple cubic masses of brickwork. He carefully modelled the bases of the chimneys in a series of blocks building up, like many contemporary buildings of the time. If you look at even the cenotaph, something like that, you have the same effect of stepping upwards.
And when it comes to brickwork, old Sir Giles knew a thing or two. There are 90 million bricks in this structure. And as I think you'll agree, he's made rather more than a workman-like job of things. Scott's contemporaries were certainly impressed. The finished building quickly caught the public imagination. And in 1934, the eminent Professor Charles Riley, pondering the now familiar commuter's view, was moved to utter...
Anyone travelling on the Southern Railway from Victoria cannot help being impressed by the great pile of pleasant-coloured brick with its towers standing high above the ocean of roofs which he sees through the carriage window. What is this great romantic pile? Is it a new cathedral by that interesting church fellow up in the north? There is a faint plume of steam which can hardly be incense. And what, anyhow, are those long sloping gangways? One does not enter a church as one does a liner by such means. Nevertheless, whatever it is, it's well worth having and a great gift to so dull a part of town.
Whatever it was, some people have never been smitten.
They didn't add the fourth tower until the back end of the 1940s, and then everybody realised that they'd got an enormous great upturned table, 4-poster bed without the top on. I mean, it is really an enormous building, and if I suggested building it today on that site, by the riverside, sensitive site, I would get laughed out of court as being a producer of probably the biggest, ugliest, out-of-scale monstrosity imaginable. One wonders whether there really is a sensible use for a building of that size and that shape in the modern world. If not, clear it away and do something better with it.
But if this ever happened, we'd lose a lot more than a pile of old bricks. Some of the finer details have only been seen by the privileged few. These are the 2 carved bronze doors, featuring the figures of energy and power, and they're worth a cool £15,000 at today's scrap value. The doors lead you to the original nerve centre of the building, the A Station main control room.
Oh, it's a room of extraordinary magnificence. The architect has designed something very much in the manner of Odeon cinemas at the time. He's treated it with great respect, because he's produced a room which is virtually 100 yards long. He's then broken it up into bays by playing with ceiling and opening up the wall on this side. And the whole thing is geared to putting the switchgear against blank wall on that side. And if you look at a Bugatti of the early 1930s, you'll find that the switchgear is exactly the same. It's, you have your speedometer surrounded by a little black rim. Everything loud and clear, black on white. It's the utmost legibility. All the controls neatly labelled. And it's exactly the same as a Bugatti, because as you would find them labelled there, you would find everything sort of large and manageable, sort of welcoming to the hand. None of your sort of present day sort of wandering fingers looking for some electronic impulse to react behind the board, but something that you actually exercise control over.
It's a marvellous building. If you was to see the control room, all the mosaic tiling there, imported from Italy in 1935, it's a lovely place.
Well, what about the ceiling? How does the ceiling strike you as a...
Well, I think the ceiling is really very beautiful because, again, you see, I think the architect had the function of the room in mind, in the sense that this gentle waving is as it were, a stylized decoration based on electrical impulses.
When the station was first commissioned, if you went in the in the actual control room, with the parquet flooring, carpet slippers were the order of the day, and the common herd were not allowed in the control room.
And it is really no surprise to me to be told that the people who worked in here had to wear muffled shoes, because it suggests a measure of respect for the building. The people who worked here recognized how beautiful this building is, as indeed it is.
And this, now, this, I believe, is called a synchronizer, so they tell me. This actually seems to sit rather better with the architect's idea, does it not?
Well, I suspect that this is the only part of the switchgear that actually belongs to the architect's design, because in terms of proportion and design, it matches beautifully with the architecture. I don't know what the things are for, but they have enormous fun moving these things about. It's so easy when you see these great little Mickey Mouse ears, all geared and little cogs up there, and there's something running up controlling the whole thing. And it's virtually finger light.
Yes.
It wasn't just the control room that got this treatment. Even the guts of the building, the two giant turbine halls, which are big enough to accommodate St. Paul's Cathedral, received the same attention.
And it was painted just like the Rolls-Royce motor car finish. Cellulose paint. It was all filled in and rubbed down and sprayed and rubbed down and filled in and sprayed and everything else. And they had a sheen on them just like a high-class motor car. And God help you if you, when you took things adrift, you had to be careful not to chip the paint and so on and so forth. It was absolutely spotless. You could literally eat your meals off the turbine room floor. I'm not exaggerating. There were two women that did the cleaning with these mechanical washers. I forget the name of, one of them was named Flo something or other, Florence something. She was known as Flo, and the other one, her mate, they got the name because they went up and back and up and back. They became known as Ebb and Flow.
But apart from being kept in tip-top condition, believe it or not, it was actually a working power station as well. The generation of electricity may have been squeaky clean, but the prediction of how much of the stuff was actually needed was a little less sophisticated.
It comes from a time, do you know, when they used to have a man up on the roof looking at the weather, seeing storms approaching, and then phoning down to the control room to tell them to put more generators on, because they knew that more electricity was going to be used.
Yes, Scotland. Very good. We can get no more help from Scotland, so we shall have to shed low 5%.
Throughout the war years, Battersea battled on regardless, and her smoke plumes acted as a beacon for bomber pilots searching for home.
When the lights go on again, all over the world, and the boys are home again.
Remarkably, although an obvious target, Battersea was only hit twice, and minimal damage was caused, although it was a close-run thing.
The first night of the Blitz, when they bombed the London docks, they dropped a 500-pounder in Section 3 of the switch house. And it hit a switch, and it was the electrical explosion and fire that caused the damage. We didn't know at the time, but the bomb had disintegrated coming through the concrete roof. And the next day we were up there clearing up, and I was with the electrical maintenance engineer, and we were looking around, and he found a long cylinder about this long, you see. And, the hell's this? I said, I'm damned if I know. Chucked it aside. Went on, and then we went up onto the gallery, walked along the end, and Mackenzie was talking with the RE sergeant who was in charge of a bomb disposal squad that was digging for some DAs out on the lawn, you see. And the sergeant's eyes came out like chapel hat pegs. He said, Christ, he said, give me that. Well, what is it? It's the detonator out of the bomb, you see. It hadn't gone off.
Today, outside the control rooms, Battersea boasts little of its former glory. It may have come off unscathed during the war, but it was finally beaten by the advance of technology and straightforward economic pragmatism. It's all a far cry from the station's heyday, when it was a working community with a vibrant social life. And although Battersea has been closed now for several years, former employees still meet regularly in the local to chew over old times.
Through the power news now, I've got up to 40 people since I left the power station died.
That was the year he was going to break all the records. And
yeah.
It was a firefighting competition.
That's right.
And he said, I'm going to break my own record. And what did he do? Fell over with the hose pipe when he was running up there.
That was the hardest worker in the power station, wasn't it? And there's the one of Seacombe taking on top of Chelsea Bridge. It appears that Seacombe turned around and said, what can I give anybody like who's got everything? I think I'll give him a drawing, a cardboard drawing of Battersea Power Station.
Yeah. And as these chaps will tell you, some pretty unlikely things were bunged into the furnaces to keep Britain's power supplies running.
The Bank of England were the biggest customers to get rid of all the disused banknotes before they had their own incineration. And we also had the Vice Squad, which would bring in their lorry loads of blue films and whatever they wanted to get rid of.
Vice of a more subtle nature was part of a superintendent's brief.
The screen attendant was found in the woman's lavatory one night shift about 2 o'clock in the morning. And when I asked him what he was doing in there, he said he'd been in there to show her the Soviet war news. And I said, well, that was the latest term that I'd heard for that, because he wasn't showing her that, I'm certain.
Do you remember Queen Mary's visit?
Oh, blow! By 90? 1935, that was.
What do you mean, the boat or the woman?
Over the years, Battersea has played host to a wide range of visitors.
Battersea Power Station came in for a thorough inspection by Mr. Malenkov.
Everyone wanted to see the place.
Chairman of the Central Electricity Authority. The former Soviet Premier talked through an interpreter.
So it was natural that the station should have its own guide. She was Margaret Jamieson.
I brought them all round the outside of the station to see how the coal came in the barges and on the cranes and onto the conveyor belt.
Onto that?
Yes, onto that there. And either into the coal store or into the station. And, of course, that held 85,000 tons of coal when it was...
85,000 tons?
85,000 tons of coal. That's a lot of coal.
Did they ever get the bits at the bottom out? Doesn't happen in coal bunkers, is it?
No. Sometimes, I think. Yes, sometimes.
Was that different types of...
And some of Margaret's tools even managed to capture the spirit of the place.
We got into the control room this day, and Fred Reynolds, who was one of our electricians, a wonderful ballroom dancer, and I enjoyed dancing. And we got into the control room. I was doing my little spiel, to the visitors, and suddenly Fred came over and said, "How about a tango?" And in 2 seconds, we were doing a tango up and down the control room.
In all its 50 years of operation, Battersea has had only one major failure, but it happened to be on a very public occasion.
Good evening. This is BBC Two.
It was the 21st of April 1964, and the nation was expecting the grand opening of a new television channel, BBC Two. Battersea failed to deliver, and the planned transmission couldn't proceed.
And next, the girl who would have been the first woman to have appeared on BBC Two were it not for Play School at 11 o'clock this morning. Programme reporter Pamela Donald.
Ah, yes, but I'll tell you something, and with the Battersea Power Station, please take note, I intend to be the last tonight.
Battersea's upstaging of BBC Two was just the beginning of a more glamorous career for the station. It was soon to become a film star in its own right. Whether it's Superman 3 or Monty Python's The Meaning of Life, Battersea gives a striking performance. And one of the station's most bizarre roles was its affair with a pig. This elaborate stunt was designed to produce an album cover for the group Pink Floyd.
And the idea was that they put it up on a rope between the two chimneys and photograph it up there. So everything was fine. They had a marksman standing by with a high-powered rifle in case this should break loose. So he could shoot it down, and break loose it did. But the chap with the rifle was going up in the lift at the time it broke away. And we were all gazing skywards at a rather large pig disappearing. And one of the camera crew said, "I think someone had better go and phone Heathrow Airport and tell them that we've lost our pig and it's heading their direction."
In case you're wondering, the pig represented the fans, and the power station, with its 4 phallic chimneys, a monolithic rock group. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Battersea continues to inspire unusual ideas. The very latest thing is this Tim Greenall designer table, for example. A mere snip at £900. The fascination with Battersea is no less strong today than it was when it first appeared on the skyline over 50 years ago. When the news broke that Battersea Power Station was to close, journalist Felix Barker ran a column in the Standard, inviting comment.
And the response was quite extraordinary. I mean, literally, thousands of letters. And I wanted to find out what people thought, whether they wanted to save it, whether they wanted it pulled down, and if so, why. And the letters began to start pouring in. One of them, rather amusing little one here, just, somebody went to the trouble of sending a little letter saying that and putting, little hearts on it. I brought 1 or 2 letters along. Take this one. This was from a reader in Hornchurch who wrote, "Why not use it as a building for Mrs. Thatcher's retirement?" A girl called Judith Eagle wrote to me and said, "I think it should become a cathedral, an interdenominational one, with smoke of different colours coming out of the chimneys. Blue for the Church of England, white for the Roman Catholics, and red for nonconformists. And the 4th one, black for don't knows." And here's a Miss Felicity Farker of Kensington.
It was a landmark when I was young. I remember in the early 1930s being taken to see it by moonlight after a Deb's dance. And here's a real cri de coeur. I should simply be lost without its presence. This was a lady writing from Mitcham. Just looking at it elates me and makes me feel breathless. The feeling is beyond description.
As Battersea moves into a new era, it's not just a building that's being passed on. For thousands of Londoners, and particularly for those who spent their working lives here, it takes with it both the trappings of the past and the affections of those who knew it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's a place that everybody enjoyed working at and wouldn't like to see nothing happen to it. I wouldn't like to see it go.
It was a situation that nobody wanted to end. In fact, if we could have run the station after it closed down on our own, I think we would have done.
To me, it's a beautiful building, that's just part of England now. I couldn't ever imagine them demolishing it or anything like that, it's got to stay. That place has got to stay. Whatever they make it into, it's got to stay as it was.
Sweetheart, one more perfect day is through. Fly down, sweetheart, one more perfect dream come true.